Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 83, questions and answers. Do we have some questions and maybe a whole lot of answers, Jay?
Well, we hope to have answers. I think that's always the goal. Whether we actually do, I mean, that's always the struggle, right?
Yeah, it's always the struggle. We're here to do a Q&A episode. We like to do these at least once a month. A few things we want to change. And one of those is getting that information out to you easier. And that is feedback at the Home Lab Show. We were putting the year after it. We decided just to make it feedback at the Home Lab Show, just to make it easy. And we want to make sure we start saying this at the beginning here, because I know some people just want to be able to send an email, not fill out a form. If you don't want to give us your email address, that's fine too. You can use a form. You can use, because this was something that was discussed before with the forums. Yes, anonymous email addresses for now. I don't think we'll get caught up in these spam filters, but just in case they do, it is a risk that may happen. But feedback at thehomelab.show, or head over to thehomelab.show, and we have a contact form where you can dump some data in there. And we like hearing from you, and we love the viewer suggested content, topics to cover, or just questions that we can help you with and get your home lab started. But we have to pay the bills here for our home lab in the Home Lab Show. And that is done with Linode. They are a sponsor for the day. They're a sponsor of the Home Lab Show since the beginning. It is a great place to host your home lab projects that maybe belong in Linode's lab. You know, some things you might want public facing, not on your IP addresses, or if you're setting up a VPN, great thing to do with Linode. So you can start testing all that. It's a great place to test all those fun things that you need to keep up and running and run in their data center, not necessarily yours. So great place to learn, lots of templates to play with. And we thank Linode for sponsoring the Home Lab Show. To get started with them, we have the offer of the Home Lab Show, and it is down linked in the description as well. All right. What's the, should we start with what we were ranting about yesterday for like an hour?
I think so. We had an interesting discussion during our weekly call. So I think it's probably worth bringing up at least.
Yeah. Now this started, and I'm not specifically picking on TrueNAS Scale, but it is where the discussion started, is with TrueNAS Scale. Now, what it comes down to is using things that are built well with like Kubernetes and Docker and all these fancy deployment tools that can get you up and running fast. The problem that people run into, and one of my other YouTube friends, he had actually, and he made an updated video to correct it, but he had made a mistake. I remember a few years back talking about using Docker containers for doing Unify. And he took down the video and made an updated one because he had forgot to mention about the storage volumes. And what happens when you're setting up any of these is, if you're not clear on how storage volumes work, so you treat your Docker systems as very ephemeral. They can be just deleted, rebuilt at any time. The problem is, can they be? That's something you should test. You should test that thoroughly to make sure before you put any data in there that you have the ability to back it up. It's a process that a lot of people, they struggle when they're learning, and I get it. It's a lot of knowledge to gather, and they're like, hey, I did a Docker pull and I Docker this and Docker that, and a whole lot of commands later, it's suddenly up and running. Awesome. Let me start using this. And one of the different tools I was testing, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is Joplin Notes. And I was like, hey, great. The folks at TrueCharts have a Docker image for this. This looks like it's going to be really easy to install. And it was. And it even had a spot where it said, store your data here. So I did. The puzzle I have, and this is because it goes back to the testing, I synced it with my notes, but then I realized when I started looking at the data folders, there's no data in them. So if you rebuild the Docker container, all the data is not going where it's supposed to. So it rebuilds all your data with it, which is not the ideal situation. My bigger thing is people should spend more time testing. And I've run into this, unfortunately, where people contact us, where they set up an app, they set up a jail in the older style TrueNAS Core, or it's a, TrueNAS Scale, and they've set up, I've ranted on one of my reviews of TrueNAS Scale on Nextcloud, where it does properly put the data in the storage volumes, but it does not have a easy restore method. And so what people do is when they try to reinstall it, it wants to generate new passwords for databases and things like that. And if you didn't take the time to dig into how those passwords are saved, you have a database with a password that's different than the one you're reinstalling. And the restore process then becomes substantially more complicated, and that's where people get really agitated. It can be very disheartening to spend a lot of time building something, getting it to work, but then find out from a minor mishap or just an update, you lost all of your data. So we always encourage people to really spend the time making sure that once you get something up and running, and you should be taking notes along the way of how you got to the point of it up and running, then try to rebuild it again, then put some demo data in there and rebuild it again. Now you have a process. Was your demo data there after the rebuild? That is something you should do before production. I know it goes without saying that you should do this, but you would be shocked at the number of people that go as far as in production, because that's sometimes the people who are contacting us. It's not from a random person, a home user that has lost some data. We've had businesses contact us from internal IT teams that just deployed something and now it's not working because they can't. Well, it is working. It just has no data in it. So I
Yep.
granted, I do consulting, so I'm talking against myself here, but I much rather help people with an innovative project and getting something set up than try to recover data. Those are always way more tedious and way more expensive than a properly set up system ahead. So this goes against my business model in some ways, but I
Right.
really want people just to have things set up right. I'd rather always work on innovation, not recovery. That's my opinion on that. So
Yeah.
question, will I answer? Yes, we are taking Q&A from the live feed comments as well. So
Yeah, so kind of in line with that, there is something that I think should be obvious but never is when it comes to restoring data because we're on the subject. So this is just a tip, but I feel like a certain percentage will be like, of course that's what I'm going to do. Why would I do anything else? But you'd be surprised. So if you're like me and you use LVM, like you really should use LVM, it's really good. But if you expand your VM, like a cloud VM, for example, onto another disk to grow it, basically make sure you're not just grabbing the one disk. Update your backup to get all of the disks in your LVM config, because if you're only backing up one disk and then you try to restore it, that could be a little embarrassing. I've actually seen that happening, but always just keep an inventory of your virtual disks and what you have. Try a test restore, just like you were saying. And to your point earlier, it's kind of like how I make videos. I think you're probably the same. I come up with some commands to arrive at a state, but before I record it, I destroy everything, rebuild it, destroy, rebuild it, try to take away a few commands, try to find out if there's any commands that just aren't necessary. You could eliminate some steps and get it down to like a distilled process, just like you were saying. And that could really help. It's just strange to me how so many people just get set up and running with something they trusted immediately and then they just keep using it. Kind of like how some people will complain that Wi-Fi doesn't work in Ubuntu. And then I'm thinking, you didn't even try it in live mode. You would have known that ahead of time. You replaced your entire operating system and now you have no network. But it is what it is. Guess we
yep.
have to train people.
And I think too, Jay, we touched on this on one of our episodes, kind of that automation mindset. One of the things that Jay
Yep.
does is, well, I think I'm going to guess at how Jay does this because I know Jay well enough, and that I think this is the right answer. Jay doesn't ever install anything directly on his system. He updates his Ansible script and makes sure it installs it. So if Jay says, "Hey, I would like this utility added to my system, this extra package,"
Yep.
he goes and not apt-get install it to his system. He updates his Ansible script. That way he knows it's updating and installing on his system. And if you are doing it from that methodology, like you're always starting from a build script, that
Yep.
makes it extremely repeatable. And it's when I built some, I got to probably do an updated video on MinIO, which is an S3 system. And one of the things that I did was I built an install script and I kept re-rolling the system back, run the install script. Well, I didn't have the outcome I expected. Roll the system back, like Jay said, learn LVM. I was using a VM, so it was a snapshot that I just hit rollback snapshot and rerun the script. Oh, it's broke here. All right, fix the script. But now I have that deploy script, and because it had to be deployed on several different servers to create a similar setup at all these different sites, one script deployed to all the sites once, and that same script can be run again to easily push a new password, for example, to set because you have to, when you're building MinIO and storage buckets, you want the same password set to the storage targets for these systems. So you do that actually all through the command line, and
Yep.
scripts are really handy for that. So as long as you start thinking from that mentality of it, matter of fact, I'm going to work on writing an installer because we had a discussion about Graylog, and there's some Graylog 5 is out. I have not upgraded to it because you can't just hit upgrade from 4 to 5. There's some trickiness to it. So I'm going to do a new install video for 5 because they have some very different changes. But I want to build that as a script that I'll give away on like my GitHub so people can follow the process from Graylog. I'm copying it just like I did my Unify video. I'm copying it from the official documents, but I'll add any notes in there to make it clear about how to get that done.
Yep, and you are right, by the way. That's how I roll out apps. Basically, every application I install, even on laptops and desktops, is always a Git push every single time. But there's one more layer because I'll push to a staging repository where it's tested, and then if I get a message back that it applied successfully, then I graduate it to the production repository, and then all my systems have it. But yeah, you were pretty spot on though.
Yeah. I see a question. It's a pretty good one in here. We haven't talked about it much. Wendell did a good rant on this. Wendell from Level One Techs. I can't remember the name of the video. It was, I think, it's actually titled about Windows storage performance. And it's
Mhm.
Mr. Pixel here says, "Is there a good alternative to Windows storage spaces for RAIDing, pooling, NVMe disks, and bifurcation cards and a server?" I would never recommend, unless you're absolutely locked in and have to use it, using Windows storage spaces. I say Wendell ranted about it because he talked about how disappointed he was in the performance of it, just not being there. One of the ways in the enterprise world that you can get a large volume of storage inside of Windows is using, and I'll throw TrueNAS out there because it's a popular solution. You build your TrueNAS server to high speed spec. You can either A, have people directly connecting to it as a NAS, or B, because you want to use all the features of a Windows file system, you can present the TrueNAS iSCSI as a storage option for a Windows system. And then you get to use all your normal Windows tools that you're used to for managing, and it shows up as a drive. So you can mount an iSCSI as a block device in Windows and present it as a drive. So I think that would probably be a good alternative to storage spaces. I need to hold, there's a lot more of your use case I probably have to know to give a more complete answer, but that's a path you can look down and see if it matches the features you're looking for.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I
So
haven't looked at storage spaces in a long time.
I don't think I haven't either. I haven't used Azure much. I mean, I used to use it for work, so I did kind of know it, but it just kind of like disappeared after I left, I
Yeah.
think. So yeah, that's that. So let's see. There was a question I thought of answering. Let's see here.
I'll quickly answer this one real quick.
Okay.
I see someone asking about Open App ID and Snort. It's just not great. It's going to miss some things. You're finding some applications aren't identified. This is the challenge with identifying applications, even with firewalls with deep packet inspection. They don't always get it right. It is hard to identify traffic because the more traffic that's encrypted, the more blind the firewall becomes to said traffic. So this is always a cat and mouse game. I've got an entire video dedicated to content filtering and the challenges within it. So that's a good video where I break down why it's so hard to do that on a firewall. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a complicated, it's an entire long video on that topic of trying to identify things based on the just the traffic passing through the firewall.
So I'm going to answer this question. So basically, someone is asking how would they clone, one-to-one clone
That's a
from
good
a,
question.
a VPS basically to a local server. In this, you could probably ask the same question in the opposite direction. It'd be the same. So on Linode's documentation, and this will probably work in other cloud providers too. I just can't confirm or deny that. But I do this a lot on Linode, actually. I probably do this every month. So there's an article on Linode's documentation that goes over a DD over SSH, process for backing up a disk. And this is something that you could use to even send something up to Linode. Let's just say you had a custom Debian VM that you have set up the way you want it. You can literally just DD that over to Linode. I haven't tested that, but that's more of a theoretical thing. I have done Linode to local and then local up to Linode, and it works just fine. So the process is basically rebooting your instance in recovery mode, which in the case of Linode is just a Phoenix ISO. It gives you a command line. You basically set a password or a key or whatever, and start SSH local. You just run the DD command that's on their documentation page. It takes a while because you're pulling down an entire disk, but it does work, and that's actually how I back up the instances that I manage on Linode's platform. I have other backups too. That's not the only way I do it, but the DD clone is probably the way I would go.
Yeah. DD clone is definitely one of the ways to do it. The most ideal way to do it is if you have a script that built whatever services you're running in the cloud, you should be able to rerun that script again on
Yep.
a local instance and do it. But DD is definitely an option.
Yep. And it takes a while to get your automation to that point. So I
Yeah.
feel like for pretty much everyone, they either stay with this process or they just start with this process and back up this way. Then, eventually they'll build their automation up and get used to that mindset. But yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, the automation, it's where everyone wants to be, but trust
Yep.
me, there are still a lot of things Tom doesn't have automated. I just haven't had the time to redo them automated. Or, Graylog is an example. I set up Graylog like 3 years ago, and now I need to set up again with 5. So even if I did have an automation script, it wouldn't even be valid because it'd be completely different. So I want to do it mostly for you to have an automation script. So I'm hoping, but the downside is it does make my video a lot harder to do because I had to first build the automation script, then do Graylog. I could just follow their install instructions, which would be fast. I can copy and paste those real quick and do it once. But
I
the
could
goal is
have
always,
you automate that so quick. And I even have my Graylog server automated to where it's a variable which Graylog server an instance is supposed to report to. So I literally just changed the variable per instance to tell it where it needs to send its logs, and then the firewall will allow it through from there. So
yeah.
we need to talk about it. We need to get you automated.
Need to get me automated. Well, I understand your side of the automation, automating the servers to talk to Graylog. What I need is an automated installer right now for Graylog 5. So
That's
that's it's
that's not hard to do. I've done way worse.
yeah. Yeah, you made that wiki installer and that was amazing. So
Yep. Yep.
because that can be a pain to set up.
MediaWiki
I don't
is a
think we ever
pain.
did a
Yeah.
video on that.
Yeah, that would be something too.
Hmm.
All
All
right.
right. Ah,
So a couple of quick ones to knock out because these are relatively they're more or less statements rather than questions. But in a recent episode, I think it was it the previous one or the one before that? And I'm getting a little confused. So basically, we were talking about monitoring, and someone asked how I do it, how I get notifications, and I mentioned how I get mine, and I mentioned that I don't use SMS. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with using SMS. And someone pointed out, Hacks with Axe pointed out many cell providers have emailed SMS gateways. You can send an SMS messages via an email address for free. And then someone named Scott Wilson mentioned Twilio for notification options. It's easy to integrate, pay as you need, which is all true. All of that is absolutely true. There really isn't any reason for me to go away from SMS other than I get a lot of text messages and I just don't want it buried. And I know there's ways to have different notification alert settings and whatnot, but I really liked having everything in a standalone application rather than, being lumped in with, my kid talking about a movie trailer he watched. And right next to that is a server alarm. But there's nothing wrong with that. And yeah, Twilio is really easy. I have set it up before. It took me all of like maybe 10 minutes to set up. It's surprisingly easy. And just like one of our commenters mentioned, there's an email address associated with phone number, so you could just use that, and that could even be easier. But yeah, we understand that that stuff exists, but sometimes just go a different direction because of reasons, I guess.
yeah, and the mail server, I seen someone asked about that for getting your notifications. I'd actually commented that, like Synology has a mail server built in. There's a lot of different and projects out there that are easy to get started with a mail server. Me and Jay will talk about this all the time, and we say the same thing. It's easy receiving mail. It's easy setting up some of the mail servers. There's a lot of automated script. It's hard getting off of spam lists. The only
Right.
real solution to the problem, it's kind of a workaround, but I guess this is about points of view. You pretty much have to pay for a legitimate relay service, such as I think Mailgun is one of them. There's MailHop. There's a couple different relay services from a couple big companies out there, and those relay services are almost a necessity to send email because if you set up, especially if you're a Homelab user and you're doing this on a cable modem, pretty much all the ISPs that provide internet for home users, their IPs are automatically on a list. They just say, you know what, we don't receive email from those. That's kind of a default spam block, because that was a big problem solving for spam. So as much as mail servers is a really frequent question we get, in people asking about Homelab, hey, we'd love to set up a mail server. It's you pretty much, I guess maybe it's worth doing as long as you accept that you're going to have to buy relay service access in order to get emails to leave your system
Right.
properly, because you're not going to be able to email most people. You're going to end up on almost everybody's spam list just because of the IP block you belong to.
Right. I would even go a bit further with the mindset to kind of phrase this with a series of 3 questions. Like, should it be in your home lab, right? How do you decide that? So I've come up with 3 questions. So the first question is it fun? The second question is it educational? And the third question is it maintainable? So the first thing being, is it fun? Because if you're just doing it for learning for work and that's the only thing that you do it for and you don't actually have fun with it, it's just something you're required to know for work. Well, I mean, that's not really all that fun, but it is important, yes. But we kind of maintain a little bit of fun because we want to work on these things and learn things. So we got to ask, is it fun? Is it educational? Is this something that you want to learn? Is this something that's been on your radar for a while that you just want to dive in and learn it? That's another thing also. But the third question, is it maintainable? Do you have the time to maintain it? If
Right.
you don't, it's just, no matter how fun and educational it might be, if you don't have the time to put into it, then you're just not going. It's just going to become a way for threat actors to get in, basically. So when it comes to an email server, in my personal opinion, is it fun? No. Is it educational? Yes, it is educational because you will absolutely learn how to maintain an email server. Is it maintainable? No. It normally is not, because just like you were saying, it's you know, blacklist and whatnot. I feel like you have to look at the anxiety level, because email is something you're going to rely on that, and sometimes for one of those mail relays it just makes sense to pay them, and they're really
Yeah.
not that expensive, so that way you don't have to maintain it, because unless it's something you want to do, maybe you want to be an email administrator, if that's what you want to do, then absolutely dive in. But if you don't have like if you can't answer yes to at least 2 of those questions, don't.
Yeah. Um, Kind of back to a true NAS scale question I seen come in here. I am almost done with all my notes to do the video, because I've been using this for a little while. I wanted to do a deep dive into it, so I just said I'm going to do a bunch of projects with true NAS scale and virtual machines, and that way I can tell you whether or not I love or hate it, because I really didn't like it in true NAS core. True NAS scale, I think they did a good job. The good news is it's fast. It's has direct access to ZFS. It uses ZVols for storage. The storage performance has been wonderful on it. I've been happy with all those features. The parts I don't like is the person just asked the question going, hey, how do I back it up? Yeah, that's a problem. They don't have any type of like download as a VM. They don't seem to have an import. So there's not any native into TrueNAS itself tooling to allow you to back it up, to allow you to, well, technically you can clone it to another TrueNAS. That kind of is an option, but you're only cloning the drive, not the metadata, like the settings, the network settings that you put into it, or any of the stuff. So all you're doing is cloning the data over, which means there's no high availability. There's no way to even start that VM. There's no automatic export of that VM to another TrueNAS. It's not like Proxmox or XCP-ng or VMware, where you can take a VM and say, hey, take this VM and place it on another server, or give me a backup file of that VM so I can back it up to a file store and then upload it again in case something happens. Those features just don't exist. And that's why when people ask, like, they want me to compare TrueNAS scale to XCP-ng or Proxmox, I'm like, they're not playing the same game. It's like they have this little add-on feature where you can run a VM in it, but that's kind of it. It's an add-on feature to run a VM. There's no, even if you had 10 TrueNAS scale systems on the same network, they can't even migrate to each other. There's not like even a live, there's no migration, not even live or otherwise. You can just clone the ZVOL with ZFS replication to another system, but that's not really the same as what you'd be looking at if you did this with Proxmox or XCP-ng or VMware. So yeah, there's not really any backup method under is the short answer, but there's also not a lot of other things. It's just kind of a, hey, cool, we can have one consolidated box that runs this cool VM. But as we said earlier, you should have that mindset of, build it with an automation script so you can rebuild it again if something happens.
Yep, absolutely. There was a question from Christopher S, and I pulled some of these from the YouTube channel. So I don't remember which video. Actually, I think this was the automation mindset this one came in from. So Christopher S asked, and I'm going to summarize this one. Basically, he's talking about having a base image in lieu of Ansible. There's a few things I wanted to comment on. So, for example, he mentioned he doesn't want to spin up anything using Ansible. So the first thing is, while you can use Ansible to spin things up, that's not really what Ansible is for. So basically, you could use Terraform, Packer to create images and things like that, or you could use none of that. But the meat of the question here is, for this individual, a base image he feels is going to work better, maintaining a base image and just restoring that. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I used to do the same thing. So there are some weaknesses when it comes to base images versus using Ansible for configuration. So with a base image, what I ran into was it just became a pain to maintain. So let's just say, for example, you're using a specific application and you want this application on every single thing, and you put that in your base image. And then later on, you stop using that application because you found a better one, right? So now you have to go into the base image and remove the app that you're replacing. Otherwise, every single server you spin up from that, from that will actually have that application in there baked in. Then every single instance you'll have to uninstall. So rather than do that, you go into the base image or remove it from there. So none of your machines that you roll out will have it. But you'll find yourself continually doing that because later on, you have a bunch of updates to install. So now you got to update the base image for that. And then it just becomes like a weekly thing at some point because you're constantly making changes. But if you don't make that many changes, sure, it's great. But when it comes to Ansible or something like it, it could even be a bash script. It doesn't really matter. Then you could just remove it from the script and just set it up to run after. Now, honestly, you could just set up a base image that pulls down a script and runs at localhost, and then your image will be updated that way. But just wanted to bring up some of those weaknesses just for food for thought. I'm not saying don't go that direction, but just keep in mind that that often happens. Personally, I got away from base images for that reason. And I really like having a script run when an instance comes online, and then that makes the rest of the config happen. You could even set up a web server, just make sure it's not externally available, like a local web server that just shares the bash script even. And then you could just curl, URL of your server, pipe to sudo bash, and have the instance do that. And that could be the easiest way to get started, even without Ansible. So I think honestly, for most people, automation does start with a bash script. And then later on, it becomes so hard to maintain, then they start looking into other solutions. So there's a natural path here, but I think this is a question that's going to come up a lot. And there is a bit of a debate around having a base image or not, with some people feeling like you probably shouldn't. The other people, say you should. It really doesn't matter. Just matters what is the best fit for you.
Yeah, the maintaining a base image becomes kind of the tricky problem.
Right.
For me, I leave, and this is what I'm doing specifically in my TrueNAS scale system. I leave an Ubuntu running all the time with automatic updates installed, so it's just always up to date if I need it for something. It's just sitting here doing nothing most of the time. But hey, my NAS isn't doing anything unless I'm recording a video, anyways. So it's just kind of running in the background doing that. And whenever I need to do a demo or a test, I need a VM real quick, I stop it, I clone it real quick, and then I start the clone, give it a new name of the project it's going to be for that day, and I set up all the things that I'm going to test on it, see if it works, and then I can delete it and destroy it. But this way I leave something running all the time. Now, technically, I should, because I will get an error message, as Jay has mentioned many times. If you don't reset machine IDs and SSH
Yep.
keys and stuff like that, I do have a quick little script. I think we mentioned it the last time during our automation one, but it's just basically all I'm doing is I delete the keys, and you do a dpkg-reconfigure SSHD after you delete all the keys, and it rebuilds them. Depending on how long I'll let that VM live, I may do that script. Now, sometimes I don't do it, and the reason why is because as far as when I'm shutting down the main from the clone, when I SSH into it, it just thinks that I'm SSH into the main one. So I don't really have an error message because it's very ephemeral. I only need this because I have an idea. I want a thing I want to demo, so I'll do it, but I don't feel like removing the thing later, so I clone the system, or you can snapshot it.
Yep. Yep. So there's a number of actually a question about Ansible I wanted to answer. It's actually kind of right in line with the one I was already going to answer anyway. So it looks like the username is Shadow We, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry in advance because I'm probably not saying that right. But so basically, Ansible tells the system what to download, from where, what parameters, and launches it. I mean, yes and no. So the quickest explanation I could think of by default, unless you use a different style, which I won't get into, Ansible is going to use SSH, and it connects to the system that you want to configure. And you write the playbooks in the YAML format. There's different modules. So there's a module for copying files. So you want to copy a file to the system, then there's a module for that. There's a module for apt. If you want to install apt packages, there's a module for DNF and so on. Whatever the package manager is, you could tell it to install packages. You could tell it to update packages. You could create a template. There's a module for making sure a service is restarted or even just enabled at all after something is installed. Basically anything that you could do in like Puppet or Chef that I'm aware of. I don't think there's anything it can't do. It could do all the same things. It's just simpler doing it. And the YAML syntax, you don't have to like know YAML, but you'll learn YAML through the eyes of Ansible by using Ansible. It's pretty simple because you could literally just type the simplest play could be apt : and then I don't know, Nginx, for example, and that's it. Like that's the entire thing. Whereas with Chef and Puppet, it's an entire code block you have to write for that one package. But it's really easy to use, and I highly recommend it. Just start out small. Some of the tutorials will have you just ping or use Ansible to ping servers just to prove that there's connectivity. Then you use it to install a package, and then next thing, copy a file. We also had a person on the YouTube channel ask, how do you deal with configuration files in Ansible? So far, I haven't seen a lot of Ansible plugins that could do more than just check out a file from Git. So actually, Ansible could do a ton of stuff there. So Ansible uses Jinja 2 templates, Jinja. It's a weird word. And it's not specific to Ansible. You could use the Jinja template with Bash, and I've done it. Any programming language can use it. But basically what it is you get a config file, and let's just say, I don't know, the SSH config file, it defaults to port 22. You could actually make something a variable instead, and then just feed the variable to the instance, and the file will be the same for each, with the only difference being the variables. And you just put the variables in brackets, and it literally just takes care of the rest. So the template module in Ansible is absolutely the way to go, because that way you don't have to maintain, a config file for this server, a config file for that server, and that just becomes a mess. You could just maintain one config file for each thing, and then just have variables in there that anything that's different from one system to the next will be in the form of a variable, so it makes it a lot easier to maintain. So that's the way that I would do that for sure. So,
Yeah, I gotta dust off my Ansible stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we could just do a sit down, and I'll maybe even turn it into a collab or something and figure out
Yeah,
how to
I
get
just
you
gotta sit down and
on
watch a
there.
bunch of Jay's Ansible videos.
Well, yeah, I think I could just create a template for you and walk you through it,
Yeah.
honestly. Just like a skeleton, just implement this and installs HTOP on anything you install it on as a proof of concept, and then you could just add to it from there.
Oh, let's build an Ansible playbook for Graylog.
Let's do it. Let's just
Now
do it.
we're solving a problem and everything at the same time, because I'm
Yeah,
positive a lot of people would love a Graylog 5 installer.
that'd be fun. I mean, I did the one for MediaWiki, and let's be honest, MediaWiki is not the easiest thing to install.
No, it's not. There's some trickiness to getting MediaWiki set up, and yes.
Yep.
Oh, this is something I probably good clarification here, Jay, and I think he's referring to you. Do I need Linode for Nextcloud? Well, as a sponsor of the show, I would suggest you use Linode and use our offer code for Nextcloud. But no, you don't
No,
need
you
Linode
don't.
for Nextcloud. You can absolutely run this locally, run this on any cloud platform you want, or anywhere that you can get it set up. I believe Jay's got some really solid tutorials on that.
Yeah, and I mentioned in mine, I don't know if this person was watching mine.
I'm
Might
gonna
have
assume
been at
yes,
the
because I don't
start.
have a Nextcloud video.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I usually mention that the instructions I'm showing you are not specific to Linode. And I try to make sure to mention that because I use Linode because when a company sponsors my channel, I have to like the product. I'm not going to just, oh, you gave me all this money to recommend it. Sure, I'll just do it for that reason. For me, I have to like it. I have to know it. I have to, be able to, put double down on, yes, this is good because I use it. So for me, I have Linode. So I have a demo account, and it's just stupid easy to use it for filming footage and things like that. So I try to make sure to mention that it's not Linode exclusive. Like you said, any cloud provider, local is fine. Once you have the instance created, I show the process usually of creating the instance on Linode. But once you have the instance, however you get it, whether you get it from Linode, DigitalOcean, Amazon, whatever it is, then from there, they're just normal commands. You're just adding, you're downloading a file, you're putting it in the location, you're changing the ownership of the file, creating the config directories and whatnot. From there, it's really kind of vanilla, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great project for learning too, because it updates rather well once you get it set up. It's pretty stable. And there's so many different places you can host it because there's Docker versions of it. That's actually one of the apps that's officially supported by TrueNAS. I believe there's a lot of write-ups on how to get it loaded on your Synology. So yeah, it's a fun project to start with. I like when you start with a goal because it helps you learn things. You kind of like, it's not just playing. I mean, don't get me wrong, playing's fun, but when you start with, I'm determined to get Nextcloud set up, what do I need to know? I probably should learn some
Right.
Linux command lines. All right, I gotta learn. I learned how to load Linux first. All right, cool. You got to start finding all the building blocks that let you get to the top of that goal.
And there are, a lot of cloud providers will have one-click apps or whatever they choose to call it. Linode has theirs. They have the marketplace, and I'm sure other cloud providers have the same, where you can literally just click a button, name it, and you have Nextcloud, and it's super easy to do. Some people ask me in my videos, like, why don't you just use the marketplace or insert name of app store here? And I'm thinking, well, I could do that. The video would be 30 seconds long because you'd just be seeing me click one button and then it's available, and that's not very entertaining. But the bigger reason is I feel like if you want to learn, if that is your goal, then I like to show people step by step how to build it because you'll be more intimately familiar with how your server is running, which I feel like is always better. But if you're in a time crunch, you don't really have that much time, and maybe learning isn't really on the top of your list right now, then the one-click apps are absolutely fine. It's just that they don't make good videos, and it doesn't make good educational content either. So if that is your use case, then that's not something like my channel helps with because it's all about educational stuff. But it's absolutely a good way to get started if that's the way you want to go. So
Yeah, it also leads you a little bit back to the beginning of this episode where we mentioned understanding how something got there. I think is really important
yeah,
as if you're an IT professional maintaining this, even if you're in Homelab, it's part of the learning experience. But you want to make sure that it sets up when I use it from their app store, which is great. But can you back up your data? Because obviously, just hitting a new instance, if your instance breaks, if you had no idea how the instance was built, you're going to have a harder time troubleshooting why it broke, and you may even have more trouble getting the data out of it to set up a new instance. So it's just a few things
yeah,
to consider. And just to rather than me type all this out, the question comes up a lot about Proxmox versus XCP-ng. There's like 2 or maybe 3 videos I've done on it, at least 2, because I did a main one and then kind of a follow-up one talking about all the different hypervisors and some thoughts from Oliver Lambert, which he is the head of the XCP-ng project. I favor XCP-ng because we do so much enterprise consulting with it. We have companies that have data centers with this, like many, many hosts, many, one of them, we helped them migrate over 2,000 virtual machines off of VMware. I've always liked it from the scalability perspective. That's why I choose XCP-ng, and I don't really have the time to mess with Proxmox. Jay likes Proxmox, and Proxmox is solid. It's reliable. It offers support for LXC containers, and I think it's a great platform. It's secure and stable. You would say it's stable, right, Jay?
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So there's no reason not to use Proxmox if you're on the fence of which one to use. Comes down to preference. I know when it comes to scalability and interoperability for the backups and everything else, and some of the really slick features, XCP-ng is really enterprise grade. So it's one of those things of, if you want that high end scalability, and you can absolutely use it in a Homelab because it's all free still. Both of these are open source and free. You don't have to buy a license for these. So they're still both very accessible, but it still comes on the choice. They're both good choices in the market, whichever one you want to build out on.
I feel it's funny a little bit or a little amusing because, everyone kind of thinks it's like Team Proxmox and Team XEPNG, and I'm just sitting here like, I like both. The only reason why I haven't done XEPNG content, or the only reason why I don't use it, is because I just landed on Proxmox because at the time where I was starting out with Proxmox or whatever, or actually picking a solution, I had a server that didn't have a lot of RAM. And I think the tiebreaker for me was the fact that, there's containers built into Proxmox, and I needed to use containers to make good use of my memory because I needed it to go, I needed it to spread kind of thin here. And that was just a tiebreaker. But I maintained Citrix VMs for like 3 years straight and became very familiar with it. So technically, I kind of went outside of my comfort zone. But a lot of people will assume because you make XCPNG videos, I make Proxmox videos, that we're on different teams. But honestly, like I love them both. I'd go as far as to say Proxmox is really good if it's business. Proxmox is good for small business. XCPNG is bigger for like the multi-location, big corporation type thing. XCPNG is going to absolutely flourish better there, but Proxmox is also good. Who knows? I might even make XCPNG content. It's just I have a lot of content to make.
And sometimes that's a challenge. Me and Jay both are pretty diverse. There's a lot of overlap in what we know, but there's also
Right.
some gaps, and it's kind of sometimes a divide and conquer thing. It's not that I wouldn't like to cover Proxmox. It comes down to time. I am so
Yeah.
behind on how many things I'd like to review that I don't have time to do it. And Jay's kind of got the same thing. He's busy cranking out some of these other videos. It's like, what do I stop and learn another hypervisor, or do I continue and update my Bash series, or update my Python series, or update my Ansible series? Jay creates a ton of content. So it's something has to give, because there's only so many hours in a day for us to produce the content. So that can,
Yeah.
it is kind of a balance. We want to get the most accurate and up-to-date information, but it can be hard for us to sometimes review exactly the same product. It's like Jay doesn't take the time to learn as much PF Sense because he doesn't use it as day in, day out. So I usually have more PF Sense content. It's not that I'm against Jay or anybody else doing PF Sense content. It's just a divide and conquer type thing of, let's see how much content we can get out there and talk about it. Jay hasn't time. I don't think you've set up WireGuard yet, have you?
No, it's on my list, but then and this is the part that some people may not know. I always have a massive editing queue because recording's the easy part, editing is the long part. So I can sit in front of a camera and talk, that's not hard, but at
Mhm.
least not for me. But then when it comes to editing, like I have 300 gigs of footage right now, I'm just chewing through, and I just finished, I think, the last video I recorded back in September, along with some new ones. And at the same time, I'm creating a video about the new Launch Heavy keyboard, which I think I'm going to put out tomorrow. So I'm doing new content in addition to going back and editing old things. So it's quite a big operation for just one person,
Yeah.
actually.
And the challenge with an editor is you need someone who can, like, I edited out one single word because it would have changed the technical accuracy of my encryption video I did yesterday.
Yeah.
I didn't know I added the word. The word was inaccurate. I had to trim one word out. It's a quick one word trim, but it does make a difference for technical accuracy. An editor would not have caught that unless they're familiar with ZFS encryption. So it's one of the challenges as we audit. It's not just editing, it's auditing. That'd probably be better to describe it. We don't edit. We spend a lot of time auditing to make sure everything is technically accurate. So you can follow our instructions to absolute, accuracy. That matters a ton to me and Jay.
Yep, and one thing I'm not gonna give a time window because right now my workload is way too high, but if I am planning at some point to roll out a beta program for the videos, so that way, the people that apply and are chosen for this, they could watch content that may not even show up for a couple of months sometimes, and just watch it before anyone else, and then just in exchange for trying all the commands, just going through the process, letting me know if anything has broken or isn't working quite well. I do plan on rolling that out to give people that experience, but I think that'll help because that's going to absolutely help with that kind of thing. But then again, with that editing queue rolling out anything, even that is going to take a while. But I'm getting so caught up at this point that I think within a month or two, I should be able to start rolling out some new services. So we'll see how it goes.
Hmm. Well, here's a fun question. One day I will do a video on this, but in the meantime, someone who's done a better video than I have time to do, check out 45 Drives. They have some videos on ZFS and metadata. That's kind of it's such a niche thing, and I don't have, and not many of my clients have a specific use case for us. There are clients that do. We just the ones we have don't have enough files to index. I have one potential client we're talking to that would probably need it because they have like 2 million files, something like that. But you can use,
Yep.
they call them special VDEV drives in ZFS. They're basically ways to take small files and make them go faster by having specialized VDEVs. This is something that you can, I think, do in Btrfs, but ZFS is coming along there. There's ways to basically say files of a certain threshold can go to different drives for that designated class of special VDEV. Wendell did a video on how to reindex some of that, but Btrfs, I believe, has policies you can apply to files to where they get saved on there for speed. This gets one of those large scale things. It's not something a Homelab user would ever really need unless you're a Homelab user that's collecting 2 million of something that you need indexed, 2 million, 3 million files. Usually the majority of people, and Homelab people are like this as well, are just storing a bunch of video files that they have found somewhere that they would like in their MB server or their Plex server or their Jellyfin server, whatever media server. And it's usually not on the scale of small files, but there are instances where you do have a high volume of small files because of some type of data iterations, and you would want something to speed up the process in there. So that it's low on my priorities list to do that. I've retweeted and share frequently 45 Drives. They do have engineers that work with this all the time because they are storage consultants at 45 Drive. So they've done videos on how that works. I can't believe they don't have more subscribers or channels because they have some of like the best videos on file systems, on Ceph. They are the Ceph experts, man. They are probably the only public facing people I know that dump that many Ceph videos out there. They have a list of them. They even have a bunch of scripts on getting Ceph deployed. They've even made some UI systems for helping you get Ceph set up. They have like a wizard system that is only maintained by, as far as I know, I don't think anyone else besides 45 Drives has done this, and it's all open source. So you have access to all of it.
Yep. Speaking of access to something, I just wanted to quick mention this. Someone in the YouTube realm mentioned the username was Lensherm,
Mm.
basically mentioning that a comment about the fact I brought up about there being an iDRAC controller in a
Ooh,
container that you
yeah.
could download. And he recommends, I didn't try it personally, but this individual is recommending DOMI style, DOMI style / Docker hyphen iDRAC 6 is the container that this individual uses for iDRAC. And the idea is that the older iDRAC, before they were able to be upgraded to HTML5, required Java in the browser, which is a bad idea. You don't want to do that. But unfortunately, there's really no other way. You have to have Java for these old ones. So what do you do? Do you just have a dummy browser that has Java in it? Just never use that browser? I would say no, because a container would probably be a better way to go here, because I think this is the best use case for a container because it's literally containing something. It's containing something that you don't want on your main system, and I think that's a really good use case for it because rather than trying to figure out if you could update the iDRAC controller, buy a new one, is it licensed or not? No, just don't worry about all that. Just use a container that has that in there. Make sure the container is only running when you actually need to use it. Make sure it's closed down so it doesn't become a loophole. But it's absolutely a great use case for a container.
Yeah. Good old iDRAC. I think soon those will age out. We won't have to worry about them no more, but that's not today.
Things take so long to age out because I mean, some Linux distributions still maintain 32-bit for some reason, and we've had 64-bit support since the Pentium 4. So, here we are. We'll probably still have this for probably another 5 to 10 years coming up a conversation, unfortunately.
um, Here's a weird one, and I don't think there's an answer for this. You're running NetApp in an AWS instance, but have you ever tried running TrueNAS in the cloud? I'm not aware of any TrueNAS cloud instances working. So
No, and you have to really be careful about this because I have used NAS solutions in the cloud. There's actually NAS solutions that exist just for this purpose and are only available in this space. They're paid, obviously. I'm not going to recommend any because it's not a recommendation. It's just letting you know that they do exist. But a lot of cloud providers will throttle transfers. And I remember when I was working with AWS more often, the issue was that if you had a file server in AWS, it's going to throttle even if you use their equivalent. They have equivalent of a NAS solution. If you use it, you're still throttled. And at the time, you couldn't even pay AWS more to not get throttled, because normally you could just pay a higher tier and not have to worry about that. But we, at the company I was working for, we were literally running into issues where we'd have a lift and shift, moving a client from on premises to the cloud. We need to transfer all of their data, and we've had clients that literally took a month, and there's nothing we could do because there's nothing we could do with AWS that would get that to be approved to get rid of the throttle. Now AWS is always coming out with new things, so it's quite possible that's not even a problem nowadays, but it was then. You just have to be really careful about that. And not only that, cloud is a great solution most of the time, but storage is always more expensive in the cloud every single time. Every client I've worked with that had, high spending in IT, it's almost always in storage in the cloud. And I've seen $20,000 bills on the low end of this. So I would be very careful with running anything in the cloud on that level.
yeah, it's a discussion I might do a dedicated video on my channel for, because there's been more and more articles about people pulling things out of the cloud. And it's weird to me that people always try to tell me, and I know where you work basically on what your answer is to this. When people insist that the cloud is where everything's going, I'm like, oh, you service small business clients. And
Yeah.
when you talk to people in enterprise, it's a big mixed bag of watching people go, wow, the cloud wasn't for us and we need to pull back. And we've helped people. We just help people build, they spend $500,000 building. That's just all the server hardware they bought, pulling it out of the cloud to put in their new location. That's common in the enterprise market. That's the quote we were working before the Homelab show. Why I was actually late. It was reviewing another large quote for another in-house data center build, because, well, mini data center, small private cloud, call it what you want. They got a $200,000 budget to buy some servers. They already have a nice building, and they evaluated the cloud options and said, well, this actually is going to be a big capital expenditure now, but the cloud bill, like Jay said, we're spending 20,000 a month. So the ROI, the system's last 5 years, the ROI is less than a year. A
Yeah.
year in, they're like, oh, cool, we got that
Yeah.
200,000 back.
I mean, you could, for that 20,000, you could probably buy several really good NAS units. But I think what it all comes down to is, in my personal opinion, and this is just coming from someone who's been in the industry like 2 decades. Um, if anyone is all in on anything, that's the wrong mindset every time, 100% of the time. I've heard of people, everything needs to be a container. We need to put everything in that one solution. And before that, everything needs to be a VM. Nothing needs to be anything. I want to be clear on that. The most talented IT and system administrators out there, the most talented people, understand that every solution that's available is a potential tool, and they match the tool to the use case, to the business, to the need. And maybe it will be a container as the best use case. Maybe they have an old iDRAC controller or something, or maybe VMs are better. Maybe physical is better. I mean, it always depends. And sometimes it's often a mix of that, because I really don't feel like we will ever reach a situation where anything fits 100% of any use case ever. It's just not the way it works. So if you have that mindset, I'm not calling anyone out. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
please reconsider and think about it, because again, the most talented people understand, match the tool to the need, and everything else is going to be a lot better. Trust me.
Yeah, there's not a one size fits all for it.
Nope.
It if a small, and I'll use an example of one of our clients. We have a carpet store. They have I don't know, 10 employees and a handful of contractors that are the carpet installers. Would I recommend an on-premise mail server to them? No, that makes no sense at all. Would I recommend putting a small data center in them? No, that makes no sense at all. Hosting your stuff in a cloud for that particular client makes the most sense. It's practical, it's cheap. And you have to really consider, and Serve the Home, great place, by the way, great forums, so especially for the home labbers here. Patrick at Serve the Home did a whole breakdown of how much money he saves by having things in a colo versus the cloud. And what he included in his calculation that I really liked was paying a technician a good technician wage of someone who's competent to go into a data center that is competent on servicing these servers. So a technician who's making, and he's in the Bay Area, so like $150,000 a year technician. He even included pricing for drive time, for service outages, et cetera, to calculate whether or not it was a real cost comparison of which one was cheaper. And for him, it's actually cheaper to keep things out of some cloud hosted service. And I like it because the tool set he gives you by doing that calculation is the tool set you need. You can't just say, well, it's cheaper if I have it in my office over here. Yeah, but now you don't have redundancy. And how long is the life cycle on that? And do you know how to fix it if it breaks? So there's all these different extra things. So having all those calculations can give you a better, more well-rounded picture of whether or not you should host it. And this is probably outside of Homelab we're talking here, but whether you should host it or not. Well, if it's in a Homelab, always host it because that's how you learn. That's how you get to be that technician that goes out there to the data center.
But also ask yourself the 3 questions. Is it fun? Is it educational? Is it maintainable?
Yes, those are all really important ones there. We're close to the end, Jays. I know you have a hard stop, right? So
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions, or I think we got them all, right?
Well, I mean, there's always more, but
Always
I think
more.
that's more that I think that's as many as we could fit in today's episode.
Yeah,
So
as many
just
as we can fit in
write us
today's
a note
episode.
and we'll do more.
So feedback at the Home Lab Show. We're going to try to remember to say it all the time. We like hearing from you. We love answering all your questions. We're going to try and do these. If there's enough questions, we'll do it twice a month. It just kind of depends on how many questions. We always encourage and like to talk to all the people and help you guys in your Home Lab journey. So thank all of you for joining us for this episode and look forward to hearing from you and see you guys next week.
See you soon.